Hi there everyone, Lars here with another Owl House review brought to you by Camille's Harem. Not just a podcast for novice writers by novice writers, but also a YouTube channel by novice writers for novice writers. Because writing is an adventure, it's more fun with friends. And today I want to have a look at the newest episode, Reaching Out. There is a whole lot that I think I need to say here for this episode in particular. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to split up this video in kind of two parts. I'm going to talk about the episode itself, breaking it down, having a look at it, and what we might be able to learn from it. And I then want to look at why I think some of the criticisms I have for this particular episode might not be because the episode in of itself had just what came from the wrong spot because it was weak, but because of things that are happening behind the scenes, which are very important for us to understand as fans of the Owl House, but also for all of you writers out there. If you want to know maybe why sometimes a book or a story just doesn't pan out, maybe it's not the story itself, but the things that are happening in the lives of the creator. So, diving right on into it, I am not a big fan of this episode. I'm sorry, and I'm going to be honest. I was really looking forward to it. I thought that there was a lot of potential from the get-go, but by the end, I was just left feeling a little bit lost and depressed. I understood everything that I watched, but it didn't hit the way that it was supposed to. I then had some conversations with others trying to figure out what on earth is going on here with this particular episode and trying to voice my concern and my insights. And I saw that other people really enjoyed this episode right here, but that there was also still something for them that just didn't quite sit right. And so after a lot of talking things over, I think that what I can say about this particular episode, why it didn't land well for me, and then, again, this is for me. For other people, they might absolutely love this episode, and that's totally fine. But for me, I didn't like it because this was an Amity empowerment episode that didn't allow for even Amity to actually progress much as a character or to hold a moral high ground. So let me get into that right here. In this episode, while it's completely understandable that Luz is feeling homesick, that she's feeling anxious, and that she's missing one of the most important days of the year with her mom because they commemorate the life of her father, she's missing this day. That makes total sense that she would be sad, that she would feel just anxious, she'd feel worried, she'd feel emboldened to do the craziest things possible to try to get back home. That all makes sense. But what doesn't make any sense is how really this just comes out of left field. And suddenly Luz just becomes a problem child. Now then, I, as a teacher, have a lot of kids who deal with all different kinds of personal problems that I am not going to elaborate right here. And I have seen plenty of teenagers break down for a variety of reasons. This is something, once again, I absolutely understand this. And yet it comes out of nowhere. And what it then becomes is two things which really I did not like. Number one, it becomes a great way to just make Luz the problem that just snowballs everything and just causes issues for everyone, which then allows for Amity to be the one to just rise above it all to show that she is the perfect girlfriend. And number two, this really did nothing to actually help Luz along as a character. And it hurt. It hurt to watch. It was embarrassing and a little bit hurtful on certain levels as well. I didn't think that this worked. And I'll get into how I think it could have worked here in just a little bit. Now then, for Amity. This could have been a great episode for Amity, where Amity can show that she is the understanding girlfriend, where she rises above all these different difficulties, and where she comes out to her father. And again, this should have been a moment that should have hit hard. I wanted it to hit hard. I wanted to feel great emotion for this moment. But I didn't feel anything in that regard. And anything, I felt disappointed. I felt frustrated. I felt a little bit upset because Amity had no right brushing off her father by the end of it. And that's saying something because I fully accept that the Blight family has a lot of issues that need to be sorted out right here. And And I wanted to just enjoy what we're getting of Alador and actually appreciate that Alador takes a very important first step forward into repairing his relationship with his kids as a father and also being a proper husband and communicating with his wife. I mean, this should have been a really great moment. And again, it just wasn't there. It's just, everything just seemed to be coming apart. I saw all of these great moments. There was a lot of great elements to this. Finding out more about Luz and her father, finding out more about Amity and her father, finding out about the twins and the fact that they've been hiding really who they really are. Again, just highlighting just how messed up the Blight family is, and that now the family takes an important step forward towards repairing their relationship with each other. That should have been great. All of this should have been great. And yet it didn't hit quite right. The one thing that did hit right, ironically enough, after I've been ratting out on B plots for the past couple of episodes, the B plot episode was phenomenal. Oh my gosh, we learned so much about Edric. He really improved as a character. He stepped up to the plate, and we see that this kid is dealing with so much self-doubt. And it makes sense where that's coming from, given his family situation, and even how his own powers really aren't the best, especially when compared to his younger sister, Amity. And yet, we got to see how this guy has incredible knowledge. He has incredible potential, and Ida gave him the positive reinforcement that he needed to start moving forward as an individual. That was brilliant. Everything in the B-plot was perfectly timed, perfectly paced, landed just right, flowed very well into the overall main plot, and facilitated what should have been the really great resolution to everything. The B-plot did everything it was supposed to, and it did it well. It's just that the main plot of this episode didn't land right. Okay, so let me get into how I feel like this episode could have been done better. And this is honestly something I don't normally do because, well, I'm not in the writer's room. I'm not a part of the creative process for the Owl House. And so I could give out tons of different suggestions left and right, but I'm not in their situation. So who am I to say most of the time what would have made this better? But in this particular case, looking at all the great elements within this episode and how they don't come together, it's like really great ingredients to make a cake, and the cake comes out a sloppy mess. Okay, well, what went wrong? Maybe it's not the combination of ingredients, maybe it was just the process of the bake. So let's have a look at this right here. First of all, Luz and how she breaks down for this special day of commemorating her father, and the fact that she's missing her mother. The fact that she's missing her mother and all the anxiety wrapped up in that has been very firmly established. That has been done very well so far within Season 2. What has not been done well has been establishing anything in connection to her father or the feelings that she might have towards her dad. Now then, while most teens might not immediately come out and say, yes, I have a dead parent, that is kind of weird, it would be very acceptable and very normal for a kid like Luz to display certain kinds of emotions or certain kinds of anxiety in regards to her dad. And given how open she's been with Ida and King about her life, I feel like it would have been really great, like what they do in Amphibia, with how Anne references her parents throughout Seasons 1 and 2, leading up to the amazing episode Hopping Mall and just the beautiful emotional sucker punch that we get at the end of that episode. We should have had that here in this episode. And the way that we would have gotten it, with Luz at least, is if we had been given some insights into earlier that there's something that has happened with her dad. She feels very anxious. She starts breaking down in front of Ida and King whenever the topic is brought up about fathers. And for Ida and for King, obviously that's also a very touchy subject, and so they give her respectful space, and they don't bring it up. But we as the audience, we see clues that there's something about her father. We might guess that maybe there was a bad divorce, maybe he's dead, maybe he's somewhere, who knows? And this is the episode where we learn that he has passed away, and that would have hit beautifully at the end, and where we realize, wow, that makes total sense why Luz would break down about her father beforehand, and why this day would hit so hard, and why she's been falling apart. Because otherwise, without any sort of foreshadowing towards that, it just seems like Luz is coming undone to be the damsel in distress, and I have had plenty of people reaching out to me, and especially one person in particular, you know who you are, lovely viewer watching this video, coming to me saying, I don't really like that Luz ends up being a damsel in distress throughout much of the show. While I don't think that Luz is really a damsel in distress throughout the series, this episode definitely puts her in that situation, and really in a degrading kind of way. This should have been a beautiful episode at the end and in retrospect, and ultimately it wasn't. Luz just becomes a mess. The reveal is thrown right on top of us without any sort of foreshadowing or any sort of preamble, and it just didn't land the way that it could have. This episode should have been the Owl House's version of Hopping Mall, where we just break down and cry and we realize just how much the men in our lives, the dad in our life, mean to us. But that didn't happen because it was not properly set up. Then let's have a look at everything going on here with Amity. The reason why I say Amity doesn't have the moral high ground within this episode is because she knowingly does something that she shouldn't. She goes into this Bonesboro brawl, and honestly, I love this concept, and I love that her dad was just this little rebellion hellion way back in the day. I love that. I really do, and it makes for a really awesome connection between father and daughter later on. But again, this is not really played off very well. Alador makes it very clear that he expects for Amity to go and try out for the Emperor's Coven and not to do something that he knows from his own experience was not the best idea. It was dangerous, and he speaks from experience being a breadwinner for the family, being a man who has a career, who can look back and say, yeah, as a teenager, that was fun and all, but that was dangerous, that was dumb, I have a belt for it. What else do I have to show for it other than the knowledge of maybe I could have spent my time better? And Alador doesn't communicate that to Amity because of the communication problems within the Blight family. That's wonderfully established. But Amity goes anyway, participates, and I do like it that we get to see her get injured and that this is not an easy injury to overcome. That should have been highlighted more when Alador shows up later on. It's all like, you got hurt. You got injured. I knew this would happen. I knew this would happen, and you're throwing away your future for what? That could have been fantastic. That could have been really what brings out the conversation, where both Alador and Amity have a point. But no, Alador's shut out as just simply the bad dad, and is not given a chance, and Amity is elevated for doing everything wrong. I'm sorry, but she honestly did. This is a problem that's been pointed out to me by others as well, especially within the series Harry Potter. When we look at the character Ginny Weasley gets away with everything. Not even her brothers Fred and George actually escape punishment for all of their ne'er-do-welling. They are mischievous, they cause all kinds of problems, but they're constantly going into detention. They even get injured for what they do. Ginny, on the other hand, Ginny never once pays for any of her wrongdoing. She comes out perfectly fine for everything because she just has amazing plot armor. The only time that it goes wrong for her is in the Chamber of Secrets, and that's because it's all a plot device. But once book 2 is done, Ginny has plot armor, and she can dance merrily through the streets with killing curses raining down on her, and she won't get touched. It's the same thing for Amity. Amity got her just desserts back when she was a foil and an antagonist to Luz, but once they started becoming friends, and especially once they start dating, Amity can't do anything wrong. Amity always comes out on top, and while we see blunders, those blunders never have any real long-lasting consequences. In fact, still good things happen from bad things that Amity chooses to do. And this is the empowering of a character who, yes, she does deserve some empowerment, but this has now gotten to a point of absolute ridiculousness. And really, if you want to have a healthy healing of the relationship between Amity and her father, the two of them they both must realize that they have done something wrong and that they're now going to work to repair it. You don't get that here in this episode. It might be implied, but it's never brought out, and it firmly puts Alador into the bad box and elevates Amity again as the girlfriend who can do no wrong. And the reason why this is dumb is because this actually impedes what could be excellent character development, like not just for Amity, but for the Blights as a whole. And yeah, that's where a lot of my frustration comes from with this particular episode. Now then, feel free to disagree with me, and I definitely get that this whole situation that's being built up here in this episode is meant to hearken to other instances that people have had, either coming out to their family or dealing with very hard family relationships. I understand that, I absolutely do. But if you want to really illustrate how this particular situation can be resolved healthily, like what we see often happening in Amphibia, this needed to play out differently. Again, this episode actually had so many great parts to it. I want to love it, but it just all comes together as a cobbled mess. And yeah, that's sometimes the problem. You can have amazing characters, amazing plot ideas, amazing conflict, amazing reveals, emotional plot twists, and yet it can all still fall apart if it is not brought together in the right kind of way. Now then, let me get into why I think that this happened right here. Because this should have been an absolutely phenomenal episode. This episode should have been, like I said earlier, this should have been the Owl House's version of Hopping Mall, and just wrecked us with just how wonderfully emotional and beautiful it was, and how it just reveals so much about these characters. But it didn't come off that way. And what I think happened right here is that the script for this particular episode, I don't think it was baked properly. I don't know how many revisions it went through. I don't know what happened in the writing room, but I think that someone else or a couple of other people should have had a look at it and said, okay, I see what you're doing right here. Let's fix a few things right here. Nip and tuck right here, put one line here. This already begins to change things up, and it will come together a whole lot better. This is, again, all about the editing process. Editing is very hard, and it's important that you get input from other people in order to properly edit your story. What's been happening with the Owl House since season 1 is that they have been trying to smash and crash their way through as much of the story as possible, because Dana Terrace knows that the Owl House has a short shelf life within the Disney company. Not with the fans. The fans love this show, but the Disney company itself has not loved it. And I think that there's been problems behind the scenes since season 1. So let me get into what I think is going on here and why this has caused problems for the Owl House overall. So already, as most fans of the Owl House know, Disney has said it's not going to get a full season 3. It'll get some special episodes, some special events, mini movies, but it's not going to get a full season 3. It's going to be wrapped up in a horribly sped up, unfulfilling way, and it's because the Owl House is not on brand. And that's just dumb. That's absolutely dumb what is going on right here. And rather than talk about politics or anything like that, because we here at Camille's Harem, we do not discuss politics unless it is fictional politics. That's the kind of politics that we want to deal with right here. So I'm not going to get into what kind of weird debates are right now going on. Instead, what I'm going to visit is I'm going to visit the history behind what's been going on with Disney television and with what I know about what's happening within the Owl House. This comes from my own research, paying attention to what industry insiders have said, as well as leaks that have been coming out from the Disney company and from people behind the scenes. I myself have not worked within the industry, nor do I have a direct contact within the production of the Owl House. So yeah, some things will be supposition or guesswork on my part, but based off of what I've been able to tell over the course of many years, I think I feel pretty confident in my assessment of the trouble that's going on behind the scenes. Number 1, though I said we are not going to discuss actual politics here, one of the problems is politics. The Bob Iger and Bob Chapek, the past CEO and the current CEO of Disney, have been playing a very stupid game of politics, both on the national and on the industrial stages. What this has meant then is that Disney has greenlit stories that they don't necessarily care about, but that they hope will get them clout. The Owl House is unfortunately one of those decisions. That is actually not a reprimand against the Owl House. The Owl House is a phenomenal show and story, but it was not chosen because it was great. It was chosen to get clout. And because of that, and because of all of the things that have been going on behind the scenes way longer than anything that's been happening this year, it was doomed that the Owl House would be put onto the chopping block unless it could produce tons of money. Why? Because clout comes for a couple of weeks and then it disappears, and Disney's suddenly like, oh yeah, that one show that we greenlit that has a whole bunch of great representation, yeah, we're going to go with something else now. So people, clean up what you're doing there with that show, and we're going to get rid of it. So, in order then to keep the Owl House going, the Owl House has to bring in views, it has to bring in money. This is where the second problem, and arguably the larger problem, really comes in. And that is that Disney hasn't known how to properly monetize any of their shows for nearly 2 decades now. The heyday of the 90s and early 2000s are done, and Disney has not properly done anything with any of their shows since probably Phineas and Ferb, and even then they did not fully capitalize on Phineas and Ferb like they could have. Back in the day when you had a really amazing show such as Phineas and Ferb, Gravity Falls, The Owl House, what you would want to do is you would want to have a whole bunch of merchandise ready to go for fans to gobble up. And Disney has said, well, people aren't interested in this stuff. Teens don't buy merchandise, only little kids. That is a wonderful load of bologna sandwich, Mickey. Let me tell you something straight. I remember, as a fan of Gravity Falls, how everyone wanted stuff from Gravity Falls, but Disney would not give it to us. But when Disney said that they would release a special edition of Journal 3, which Alex Hirsch had to fight so hard for, sold out. Instantly. I even pre-ordered the day that they came out, and it was already sold out. I couldn't make it in time. And they continuously reprinted and sold out for just Journal 3. All of the other books as well for Gravity Falls that were released sold out beautifully. They made a pretty penny. They could have actually made even more money because the demand was there for Gravity Falls merchandise. But Disney hadn't done anything with it. Disney had stopped producing good merchandise like stuff for The Little Mermaid way back in the day. In fact, actually, you could go back and you could find toys for The Little Mermaid, or for Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, or for The Lion King, because they were still doing things here on the side with little side movies or with shows to help just keep these things alive. And they were creating merchandise that people were buying. They were making money. But everything changed as we went into the 2010s and as Bob Iger took control of the company. Bob Iger wanted box office smashes. He wanted to bring in attractions at the parks and in the movies that would bring in billions of dollars. And he would only greenlight projects that would do that. Of course, there were plenty of other things that were greenlit all throughout the company, but the vast majority of resources, particularly merchandise resources, were put towards the big billion-dollar projects. And for the most part, Disney made off really, really well with a whole lot of money. Now then, television isn't going to make you billions of dollars. As a result, Disney shifted their resources away from television and to their movies divisions. And they started doing weird things there. And there's plenty of other channels that have gotten into the shenanigans there that I'm not going to get into. So suffice it to say, Disney Television suddenly now just existed. They could kind of do what they wanted, but they had very limited resources. This especially comes through with the show Tangled, the animated series. My golly, this show was incredibly popular. And if you go to Disney parks or to Disney stores, Tangled sells almost as well as Frozen merchandise. Everyone wants this stuff, especially little girls. And when you continue on the Tangled series with 4 seasons that were critically acclaimed and that fans loved, you would think that they would create all this new merchandise to complement what they were continuing to do with Tangled. They would have made a small fortune. But they didn't, because the Disney mentality had shifted elsewhere. What this means now is that unless a Disney show can be a guaranteed hit, it's not going to get much in the way of resources. And because the Owl House was chosen for clout, and not because the company really had any faith in it, that meant that the Owl House was always going to operate on minimal resources. You can actually see that in the quality of Season 1 as opposed to Season 2. Season 1 was basically being done with a skeleton crew, and it was phenomenal. But you could tell that it was still kind of low quality, and that they were definitely racing things within the story because they didn't know if they were going to survive. But they did. They survived to a Season 2, they got more resources, it was ready to go. But Dana Terrace knew that there were still things happening behind the scenes, especially with shifts happening within the Disney empire. What this means now is that with the momentum shifting away from her kind of a story, she was again on the chopping block. And so for Season 2 had to come out swinging and again do a ton of stuff that might have usually taken a full season to get to. And basically, 2 seasons are right now have been crammed into 1 season of the Owl House. That's effectively what's going on here. If we actually look at what's been happening, there's so much going on within the Owl House, and you can tell that there's so much more that they would want to do. But they are speeding their way through because they didn't know what would happen. Yes, they were told that they were going to get a 3rd season, but already before it was announced that the Owl House's 3rd season would be canceled, and then said they would just get a series of special little movies to finish everything up, you could tell that Dana Terrace was really struggling. When she showed up at Comic-Con to do a crossover event with Matt Brawley, which again just lends itself some credence to the whole connected universe theory that we've got going on, Matt was just doing well. He was beaming. He was happy. Everyone on his crew was doing well. Everyone on the Owl House crew looked drawn, drained, and especially Dana. I mean, I can't confirm this, but I think that she already knew that the forces that be within Disney were looking to axe her series, and that she was struggling to get as much done within Season 2 as she could with the resources that she could in order to make the most of the story that she can with what she has. So coming back to it right here, for this episode, reaching out, what does all of that mean? That means what I personally think is that this episode, which should have landed so amazingly and so powerfully, was not given the chance to really become what it could be because the crew was still racing to make the most of what they were given in an environment that has been incredibly toxic and overbearing. And in fact, when we look back now at so many episodes that have to do with Azura, the Good Witch, and everything that Lou says about writing and whatnot, it all makes sense. We've actually been given some really snarky commentary by the creators of the Owl House about what has been happening to them as creators, as they have been choked and forced to create a show for clout that Disney knew they weren't going to make any money on because Disney wasn't going to care, and that hurt the creative process. And yet still, because they love the story, they have done the best that they can for it. But it shows, it honestly shows, that a toxic, bad work environment behind the scenes has translated to the show not being as good as it could be and as good as it should be, because it deserves to be the best that it can be, because the Owl House has an incredible story that it's trying to tell, and I want it to be the best that it can be. And I think that, honestly, Dana and her crew are doing the best that they can with a horrible hand and situation that's been dealt to them by Disney. And this is not just a problem for the Owl House. This, I think, is a problem all across the board for Disney. They've created a very bad environment for their creators. Now then, as writers, what can we honestly take away from this? You can't write a good story unless you yourself are in a good place. And yeah, sure, people might point to people like Ernest Hemingway and be like, hey, look, this guy was drunk and high for like half of the stuff that he wrote, and he wrote gorgeous books. Well, we don't live in the 1920s and 1930s anymore. Things have changed. And quite honestly, if you try writing a story when you are not ready to write one, things are going to fall apart. This has been a constant struggle for ourselves within Camille's Harem, writing stories when we knew that we ourselves weren't feeling well, Chapters come out as just absolute garbage and mush. Things fall apart. We run out of time. We berate ourselves. We become anxious. We fall apart. And that's what happens when you have a bad creative environment for yourself as a writer. So one of the things that you can do for yourself as a writer is to do everything you can to keep yourself healthy, keep yourself happy to the best of your ability. Make sure that you've got positive reinforcement in your life. Make sure that you've got good people helping you to write your story. And then go forth and write. If you can do that, you will have created a good positive environment for yourself, and you'll be able to do the best that you can with your skill by your story, because your story deserves the best that it possibly can get. So yeah, those have been my thoughts on this episode, Reaching Out. Whew! I've gone on for a really long time, longer than I expected I would, but I think it's very important to bring this kind of stuff up. And if you're really interested in knowing more about what's happening behind the scenes at Disney, look, I know that there's a whole lot of people out there who don't want to hear bad stuff what's happening over in Tinseltown or at the House of Mouse, but there's plenty of resources out there for you to go and check out. Plenty of people who are way more in the know, who know what's going on behind the scenes. So if you're interested, check those places on out. Like I said, we're not going to get political here at Camille's Harem. We don't want any debates down in the comments about whatever weird stuff Disney's right now getting involved in. We care about stories. So I'd love to hear what you have to think about Reaching Out. What are your criticisms about this episode, or what worked really well for you? If this episode worked well for you, please tell me why it did. I'd love to hear it. I want to get other perspectives on this particular episode because I think there's a whole lot to say about it. In the meantime, if you're interested in more concrete writing advice, please check out our other videos here on YouTube, as well as our podcast over at Camille's Harem, found on Podbean, iTunes, Google Play, Spotify, the works. We have writing exercises over at our Pinterest page, and links for a whole lot more down in the description below. Thank you for joining us on this adventure that we call writing. Please take care of yourselves. And until the next video, y'all, tschüss.